"I don't need a brat like you," he sneered, and I was stunned to see my father laughing mockingly. "Sorry, but I'm not gonna take care of you. You're in high school now, you can live on your own, right? I'm running off with my lover, so don't ever contact me again." Just after my mother's death, without attending her funeral, my father announced he was eloping with his mistress. I was utterly disillusioned with him and didn't feel like stopping him. "Go ahead, I will never contact you." "Thanks, I'm lucky to have an understanding daughter like you," he said, and left the house. I thought we'd never meet again. Considering how terrible a father he was, I felt almost relieved to be rid of him. Yet, just 3 days later, I got an incessant call from him. I thought about ignoring it but decided to answer. "Who is this?" And then came unbelievable words from my father on the other end of the line. "My name is Emily Young, a freshman in high school. You might think I'm enjoying the typical high school life, but my home situation was far from ideal. And it was all because of my father. He was a highly educated, elite accountant, often envied by others, but his true nature was far from admirable. He had a habit of looking down on those with less education than him. My mother, who only finished high school, was no exception, and he often despised her. Really, a high school diploma is embarrassing. Without me, you couldn't survive. In front of me, he would insult my mother, who seemed to have no love for him. But as he said, she struggled to be financially independent and couldn't divorce him. So, she always encouraged me to study hard. Don't end up like me. Get a qualification and earn your own living, she'd say, reading me books since I was little. Although my father earned well, he only gave us the bare minimum, so my mother couldn't afford to buy books for me. Therefore, she often took me to the library, where she would read to me. Thanks to that, I got into a prestigious private school. But was my high-achieving father proud of me? Not at all. He had no interest in me, not even knowing which high school I attended. It was because I was a girl. He still harbored archaic views of male superiority and lost interest the moment he knew his child was a girl. He had wanted a son to inherit his accounting firm. But that dream was shattered when my mother gave birth to me. And later became unable to have more children. Since then, he hardly showed any interest in my mother or me. "Damn, I'm such a nice guy to marry an ugly, stupid woman like you," he'd say when drunk, insulting my mother. She would ask him to stop, especially in front of me, but he'd get furious. "What? Talking back to me? Do you realize who's feeding you, you useless woman?" he'd yell, insulting her further, and I couldn't bear to watch, locking myself in my room and covering my ears. His tyranny wasn't limited to verbal abuse, he also had a terrible habit of cheating. Claiming he was busy with work, he often came home late, sometimes not until morning. Gradually, he started coming home reeking of women's perfume, which disgusted me. "Your perfume is too strong," I'd say, pinching my nose. He'd look at me with disdain. "What? You think your nose is too good? Why don't you wear perfume, too? A woman like you can't survive without relying on a man." I deeply hated my father for saying such things to his daughter. But it seemed like he didn't even realize I despised him. "You do take after your mom with that plain face and personality. What's the use of a girl like you studying? You'll just end up a woman with too much pride and no man will come near you." While he constantly insulted my mother for not being educated, he belittled me for being educated, saying it was pointless for a woman to study. I thought this man was truly hopeless. Moreover, he hardly gave us any money, yet he wore expensive brand suits and watches himself. Even his loungewear was stylish, and I couldn't help but wonder about this economic disparity within our own home. When I suggested to my father, "If you have that much money, why don't you buy something for mom?" he just snorted. "It's my hard-earned money. What's wrong with spending it on myself?" he said, refusing to spend a penny on us. It was only because of my mother that I could get through those days. But then, just as I entered high school, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. By the time we found out, it was too late, and she was given a short time to live. When I learned about it, I broke down and clung to her, crying, "What am I gonna do without you, Mom?" But then, thinking about it, I didn't want to cause her any more worry because of me. From then on, I tried to spend the remaining time with her as happily as possible. "Sorry for troubling you every day, Emily. You have schoolwork, too. You don't need to visit me so often," she would say with a relatively cheerful smile when I visited her in the hospital. "I come because I want to see you, Mom." Plus, staying at home means seeing that drunken father of mine. I can't stand even looking at him, I replied, to which my mother's expression turned a bit sad. I'm sorry for making you feel that way about your father. I always hoped you and your dad would get along. I'm sorry, Mom, but that's impossible. You do all the housework and take care of me, and he just looks down on you for it. I said irritably, and my mother sighed slightly. That's because I'm of no use in society, she said. That's not true, Mom. I replied, but she just gave a faint, sad smile. My father didn't visit my mother in the hospital at all. He hardly ever came home either. Once, when I did see him at home, I asked him to visit Mom, but he refused. I'm busy with work. You, her daughter, should visit her. Damn, her suddenly getting sick and leaving all the housework undone is such a nuisance. How can you talk like that? Can't you at least worry about Mom a little? I said, and he replied with disgust, worry? I'm more worried about my own future. She promised to take care of me for life, and now she gets sick so soon. It's unbelievable. I couldn't contain my anger and glared at him. What's with that look? You do realize you're living off me, right? I wanted to leave this house, but frustratingly, he was right. I was still a freshman in high school and under his roof. Then, a month later, my mother passed away. Grieving, I was busy preparing for her funeral. My father insisted we didn't need to have a funeral and didn't help at all, but I wanted to give my mother a modest funeral. I called him, busy with work and not coming home. Hey, I've decided to hold a funeral for Mom, so please come. When did I stop calling him Dad? That thought crossed my mind, but I had no intention of using that term ever again. Then, in an irritated tone, he replied. Damn, I told you we don't need a funeral. I'm not gonna spend any money on that, you know. I'll work and pay you back in the future. So, please, at least come to the funeral. I'm busy that day. Plus, I hate such pathetic events like funerals, he said, and hung up unilaterally. I was left speechless. Even if our relationship had soured, he was still married to her for years. Yet, he wouldn't be there for her final moments or even attend her funeral. This was the last straw for me. I completely lost any respect for my father. The next day, something unusual happened. I thought it was rare for my father to be home, but there he was in the living room, with a big suitcase. Seeing my puzzled face, he blurted out. I don't need a brat like you, he sneered, and I was stunned to see my father laughing mockingly. Sorry, but I'm not gonna look after you. You're in high school, you can live on your own, right? I'm eloping with my lover, so don't ever contact me again. Just after my mom's death, without attending her funeral, my father announced his elopement with his mistress. I was utterly disillusioned with him and had no intention of stopping him. Just do what you want, I definitely won't contact you. Thanks, I'm lucky to have such an understanding daughter, he said and left the house. I thought that was the last time we'd see each other. Considering how terrible he was as a father, I felt strangely refreshed to be rid of him. Yet, just 3 days later, I received an incessant call from him. I thought about ignoring it, but then decided to answer. Who is this? Caught off guard by my response, he stuttered. You. How can you ask who is this to your own father? I retorted just as fiercely. You really think I still consider you my father? Are you stupid? At this, he seemed even more flustered. Hey, you've done something terrible, you know? Because of you, I might lose my job. What are you talking about? I haven't done anything. Weren't you the one who said never to contact you again? I replied nonchalantly. Then, at the peak of his anger, he shouted over the phone. Is this really the time for that? I know it's your doing. Listening to him huffing and puffing in anger, I couldn't help but laugh. Yes, he was right. The predicament he found himself in was my doing. This goes back to before my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. Fed up with my father's constant infidelity, I decided to gather evidence of his affairs by looking through his phone. When he was drunk, he often carelessly left his phone unlocked and fell asleep. I quickly took his phone from his hand and started sifting through the photos. There they were, countless photos of my father with a woman who seemed to be his mistress. I saved those photos to my phone. Then, I set out to uncover the identity of this mistress. But being a high school student, my options were limited. As I was pondering what to do, a close friend mentioned, you know, my friend's cousin is a private detective. I begged the friend to introduce me to his cousin, and then asked the detective to investigate my father's mistress. "Okay, I'll do it for my cousin's sake, and you can pay me later," said the detective, taking on the job. The investigation turned up something very interesting. The mistress was named Natalie Grubb. Apparently 32 years old, living alone in a fancy condo. But this condo is too big for one person. The detective mused, digging deeper. He discovered that Natalie had a husband who was on an overseas assignment. My father, who believed Natalie to be single, was in for a rude awakening. When I found out, I couldn't help but laugh. The day my father completely abandoned me and left the house, I sent the photos of his affair with Natalie to her overseas husband. Half of the photos were taken from my father's phone, and the rest were taken by the detective. And then, probably a furious call from Natalie's husband reached my father. I could hear his excited voice on the phone. "A letter was included in the photos sent to Natalie's husband, right? Your wife is having an affair with my dad. You wrote and sent that, didn't you?" "Yeah, you heard about that?" "Well, it can't be helped." "Yes, I did it, but what about it?" "I just told the truth," I said, and he was at a loss for words, trembling with anger. "By the way, planning to elope without even knowing she was married, that's just stupid," I added, which seemed to infuriate him further. "What do you mean stupid talking to your parent like that? What you did is not just telling a husband about his wife's affair. It's more serious than that," he said gravely. Curious, I asked in a puzzled tone. What do you mean?" "That's the problem, you don't understand the gravity of the situation," my father continued, his voice trembling. "Natalie's husband, he was an important executive at a major client of my company." "No way, really?" I exclaimed in surprise, but I already knew that. Unaware of this, my father lamented in a dark tone. "Oh, I'm finished. How did it come to this?" The detective's investigation had revealed that Natalie's husband was an executive at S Corporation, a publicly listed company, and a key client of my father's firm. When I learned that S Corp was a major client of my father's company, I felt a thrilling sense of excitement. This was my chance for revenge for my mother. "Natalie's husband stormed into the office yesterday. He spread the affair photos of me and Natalie all over the company. I was so shocked, I froze for a moment." "Serves you right," I said coolly. "Quiet. You have no idea how much contempt I faced from my employees. Me, the president, being ridiculed by those lower-level employees, it's humiliating." I couldn't help but laugh at his words. My father, always so proud and looking down on everyone else, was now scorned by his own employees. The irony was too much. "Then, the president of S Corp called and said they're ending their business with us." "Wow, that's serious." "You really don't get it, do you? It's not just that. After S Corp pulled out, all my employees submitted their resignations." I was shocked at his words. "Everyone? Why would they do that?" "Because without S Corp, my company is finished." "Is that so?" My father's accounting firm was a small office with about 5 employees. He was in charge of sales, but he hated it due to his high pride. Apparently, almost all the firm's revenue came from S Corp. The employees, fed up with my father's tyranny, must have decided to leave en masse once S Corp withdrew. I was surprised that things had escalated to this extent. But given everything my father had done, it felt like just desserts. Natalie had left him, his employees were gone, and my father was now completely alone. He had always been indifferent to my mother and me, but it turned out he was weak to loneliness, which probably led to his repeated infidelity. Feeling lonely, he suddenly made an outrageous proposition. "Well, it's fine. I was thinking of coming back home anyway." "What do you mean?" "Well, I've broken up with Natalie, and I'm all alone now. I thought I'd come live with you." His audacious suggestion was revolting to me. How could he have the nerve to come back now? As if we could ever live together harmoniously after everything. "There's no way I'm living with you. I don't want to live with you at all." I flatly rejected his proposal. Yet, seemingly oblivious to how much I despised him, he clung to the idea. "Don't be so stubborn, you're still in high school, aren't you? Still a child. You should want to live with your parent, right?" The audacity of his statement was astounding, especially after he'd said I could live on my own because I was in high school. How can he shamelessly say such a thing? Unfortunately for you, I can live just fine without you. In fact, my life would be a mess with you around, so don't you dare come back. I said, and he became angry. What are you talking about? That house you're living in is my house. It's only natural for me to return. No matter what you say, I'm definitely coming back. Faced with that reality, I had no choice but to concede. That's true, this house is in my father's name, so I don't have the right to refuse him. That's true. I reluctantly agreed, saying that. Hearing my resigned response, he sounded relieved. Right? So, from now on, let's live together as a family, just you and me. To his cheerful suggestion, I coldly retorted. No, it's fine. I'll be leaving. What? What do you mean? Where are you planning to go? My father asked, surprised by my words. I'm going to my grandparents' house in Nebraska. Living with you? No thanks. It's my mom's parents' place. When I had learned about Natalie being married, I suspected my father would eventually return to this house. So, I had already contacted my maternal grandparents in Nebraska as a precaution. They gladly agreed to take me in. My father's parents, much like him, were selfish and unmanageable, so I barely kept in touch with them. Hearing this, my father sounded troubled. Don't say that. We're the only family we have. I'll change my ways, let's live together, he insisted, but I said. I know what you're up to. You just want me to take care of you, right? You're just worried about being alone and dying alone, I accused him. No, that's not true. Look, you said you want to go to college, right? I'll pay for it. If you don't live with me, I won't pay. Are you okay with that? Faced with his intimidation over the phone, I replied simply. I'm fine with it. What? Don't be so stubborn. Planning to work part-time while attending college? It's hard, you know. Just give up on that idea. As usual, my father belittled me, but I informed him. I have the life insurance money that Mom left me. What? He sounded completely taken aback. Life insurance? You mean she had a policy? Yes. Yes, after my mother passed away, she had made sure I wouldn't struggle financially by taking out a life insurance policy. She had become ill after giving birth to me, and that's when she started worrying about what would happen to me if she fell ill again and left me alone. My father had no interest in me since then, and his infidelity was rampant. She was worried that after she was gone, he wouldn't provide me with enough money for college or even basic living expenses. So, she managed with the meager allowance my father gave and did some work from home without him knowing, just so she could pay for the insurance. Wait a minute. Where did the money for that insurance premium come from? She was just a housewife, right? So, does that mean she used my money to pay for it? My father said, as stingy as ever. If she took out insurance with my money, then I should get the payout, right? I couldn't believe he'd think there's a law for that, but I told him. No, you're wrong. Mom was working from home while being a housewife. She used that money for the insurance. What? My father, who had lived as he pleased, didn't want my mother working outside and never allowed her to even have a part-time job. So, she chose work she could do from home and earned a small income without him knowing. Hearing this, he muttered. I've been deceived. She was doing all that behind my back. I couldn't hold back my anger at his words. Deceived, really? Can you believe it? She struggled so much because you only gave her the bare minimum to live on. All my clothes were bought from auction sites. I never got new clothes. I don't think she ever spent money on herself. He was silent, unable to make a sound. And yet, you were out there splurging on brand-name goods and luxury items, enjoying life alone. You're the worst. But I had to spend on my appearance for work. Those extravagances you're talking about, they were for entertaining clients. He tried to justify, but I wasn't fooled. Sure, there were some client entertainments, but I also knew about the trips and lavish meals he enjoyed with his mistresses, while never giving a single gift to my mother or me. Remembering all this, thoroughly disgusted, I said. That's enough. I've lived with you for over a decade. I know what kind of person you are. Sorry, but don't ever contact me again. I said sharply, and although my father raised his voice saying, wait, I didn't care and hung up the phone. After that, it seems my father's company went bankrupt in no time. He had been using the company's funds for himself, expecting revenue from S Corporation. Once the dealings with S Corporation ceased, his company quickly fell into financial ruin and went bankrupt. Even after the bankruptcy, there were no job offers for my father, and his earnings plummeted. This was because rumors that he had an affair with the wife of an executive at S Corporation spread quickly within the industry, tarnishing his reputation. Still, my prideful father, unable to apologize to anyone, didn't make much effort in sales and ended up lost. Eventually, he couldn't even pay the mortgage and had to let go of the house. He tried to turn to his own parents for help, but they refused to take in such a selfish son. They even disowned him, saying, "He's no longer our son," after he had socially and financially ruined himself. Having lost his home, family, and mistress, my father is now apparently living on the streets. Never having faced failure before, he seems mentally weak and unable to rejoin society. As for me, after the memorial service for my mother, I've moved in with my grandmother in Nebraska and am finally settling into a somewhat stable life. My grandmother in Nebraska, much like my mother, is very kind and an excellent cook, and I'm enjoying a more comfortable life than when I was living at my parents' house. On my days off, I visit my mother's grave with my grandmother, and we often eat Mont Blanc cake, my mother's favorite, on our way back home. My high school life is going well, and I'm spending happy days with my friends, trying to make up for the dark times I've endured. Still, there are days when I miss my mother and end up crying. I thought my grandmother and the others didn't notice, but it seems they did care. One day, to my surprise, she bought a puppy, saying, "I thought it might help ease your loneliness a bit." "Emily, you said you love toy poodles, right?" "Yes, I love them. Having a dog has always been my dream," I replied, and my grandmother smiled warmly. I was absolutely smitten with the puppy, wagging its tail as if it would fall off. Being licked on the face by the puppy, I decided in my heart to gradually increase my happiness like this.